Bullies spit on the quiet kid. Awful idea. He's a brutal fighter. Bullies spit on the quiet kid. Awful idea. He's a brutal fighter. Marcus Valdez kept his head down as he walked through the main hallway of Riverside High School, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder. At 16, he was average height but painfully thin, with thick-rimmed glasses that constantly slipped down his nose and an oversized hoodie that seemed to swallow his frame. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partially hiding eyes that darted nervously from locker to locker. Just make it to chemistry class, he thought, clutching his textbooks tighter against his chest. 10 more minutes and first period starts. The morning routine at Riverside was always the same. Students clustered in their usual groups while Marcus navigated the edges, invisible to most, a target to others. He'd been at this school for 8 months now, ever since his family moved from Los Angeles, and every day felt like survival. Well, 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 a voice boomed behind him. Look what we got here. Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. Tyler Brennan, the unofficial king of Riverside High's social hierarchy. At 17, Tyler stood 6 feet tall with the build of someone who spent serious time in the weight room. His sandy hair was perfectly styled, and his letter jacket announced his status as the school's star linebacker. "Hey, Twig," Tyler called out, using the nickname that had stuck since Marcus's first week. "I'm talking to you." Marcus stopped, walking but didn't turn around. Don't engage, don't give them what they want. Tyler's crew materialized around him like vultures. There was Jake Morrison, Tyler's right-hand man, shorter but stockier, with arms covered in tattoos he'd gotten with a fake ID. Then came Austin Reed, the wannabe who laughed too loud at everything Tyler said, desperate to maintain his place in the group. "Dude's ignoring us," Jake sneered, stepping closer. "That's pretty rude, don't you think?" The hallway was filling with students, but Marcus noticed how quickly everyone looked away. Teachers were busy preparing for classes, and the security guard was nowhere to be seen. He was on his own. "Turn around when someone's talking to you," Tyler demanded, his voice carrying that casual authority that came from never being told no. Marcus slowly turned, his dark eyes meeting Tyler's blue ones for just a moment, before looking away. "Stay calm. Don't let them see the anger." "There we go," Tyler grinned, but it wasn't friendly. "Now, I heard something interesting yesterday. Heard you're some kind of martial arts freak. That true, Twig?" Marcus's blood ran cold. Someone had seen him at Master Lu's dojo. For the past 3 years, he'd been training in Krav Maga and mixed martial arts, spending every spare hour learning techniques that his grandfather had started teaching him before he died. But here at Riverside, that was his secret, his shield. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said quietly. Tyler laughed, and Jake and Austin joined in like a sick chorus. "Right, look at you, man, you probably can't even do a push-up." If only you knew, Marcus thought, remembering the 2 hours he'd spent in the dojo yesterday, drilling takedowns and submission holds until his GI was soaked with sweat. But there was a reason he kept quiet about his training. Violence was supposed to be the last resort. Master Lu had drilled that into him along with every technique. "Leave me alone," Marcus said, starting to walk away. "We're not done here," Tyler called. "Out." But the first bell rang, and the crowd began moving toward classrooms. Marcus escaped into chemistry class, taking his usual seat in the back corner. But throughout the entire period, he could feel Tyler's eyes on him from across the room. This wasn't over. The pattern escalated over the following weeks. Tyler and his crew seemed to have made harassing Marcus their part-time job. In the cafeteria, they'd bump into him, sending his lunch tray crashing to the floor while the entire room erupted in laughter. In the gym, they'd accidentally throw basketballs at his head during free periods. In the hallways, they'd shove him into lockers hard enough to leave bruises. "Why don't you fight back?" asked David Kim, one of the few students who'd shown Marcus any kindness. They were sitting in the library during lunch, the one place Tyler's crew seemed to avoid. Marcus looked up from his physics homework. "Fighting doesn't solve anything." "Dude, they're making your life hell," David pressed. "Everyone knows what they're doing to you. The teachers pretend they don't see it, but we all do. You have no idea what I could do to them," Marcus thought, but instead he just shrugged. "It'll blow over." But it didn't blow over. If anything, Tyler seemed energized by Marcus's refusal to retaliate. The incidents became more frequent, more public, more humiliating. It was a Tuesday in October when things reached a new low. Marcus was walking to his locker after English class when he heard the familiar sound of Tyler's laughter echoing down the hallway. He tried to duck into the nearest bathroom, but Jake was already there, blocking his path. "Going somewhere, Twig?" Jake grinned, cracking his knuckles. Tyler appeared from the other direction, cutting off Marcus's escape route. "We need to have a little talk," The hallway was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers heading to their next classes. Marcus found himself backed against the wall, his heart racing but his breathing controlled. "Stay calm. Don't let them provoke." You know what I think," Tyler said, stepping closer until Marcus could smell his cheap cologne. "I think you're exactly what you look like, a weak little nobody who thinks he can just ignore us." "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus said quietly. "Well, trouble found you," Austin piped up, eager to contribute something to the intimidation. Tyler reached out and flicked Marcus's glasses off his face. They clattered to the floor, one lens cracking against the tile. "Oops, butterfingers." Marcus knelt to pick up his glasses, and that's when Tyler's foot came down hard on his hand. Pain shot up his arm, but he didn't cry out. He'd learned to suppress that reflex years ago. "You know what I heard?" Tyler said, grinding his heel slightly. "I heard your family's broke. That why you dress like you shop at Goodwill?" "Don't react. Don't give them what they want." "I heard your dad's some kind of janitor or something," Jake added. "Real high-class stuff." Marcus's father actually worked 2 jobs, maintenance at an office building and weekend shifts at a warehouse, to keep their family afloat after the move. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Still, the comment stung. Tyler finally lifted his foot, and Marcus retrieved his broken glasses, slipping them on, despite the cracked lens that made everything look fractured. "This is fun and all," Tyler said, "but I'm getting bored. Maybe we need to try something new." That something new came 3 days later. Marcus was sitting alone at his usual table in the cafeteria, methodically eating a peanut butter sandwich he'd packed from home. The lunch his mother made him was simple but filling, and he'd learned to tune out the noise and chaos around him. He was reading a chapter for history class when a shadow fell across his table. He looked up to see Tyler standing there with a chocolate milk carton in his hand, Jake and Austin flanking him like bodyguards. "Hey, Twig," Tyler said conversationally. "You look thirsty." Before Marcus could react, Tyler upended the milk carton. Over his head, the cold liquid splashed across his hair, down his face, and soaked into his hoodie. The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter and cheers, students pulling out their phones to record the humiliation. Marcus sat perfectly still, milk dripping from his chin onto his ruined textbook. This is not the time. This is not the place. But something dark was stirring in his chest, something he'd been keeping locked away for months. "Oops," Tyler said with mock concern. "Looks like you need a shower, Twig." The laughter continued as Marcus slowly stood up, milk still dripping from his clothes. He walked calmly to the nearest trash can and threw away his soggy sandwich, then headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Tyler called after him. "Party's just getting started." Marcus didn't answer. He walked straight to the bathroom and locked himself in a stall, finally allowing his hands to shake. "Control. You have control. Don't let them win." But as he cleaned himself up with paper towels, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror of his glasses, Marcus felt something shifting inside him. The careful restraint he'd maintained for months was developing cracks of its own. That night, he trained harder than he had in weeks. Master Liu watched him demolish the heavy bag with combinations that would have dropped any of Tyler's crew, but said nothing. The old man had been teaching martial arts for 40 years, and he recognized the signs of a student reaching his breaking point. "Anger is a tool," Master Liu said quietly after Marcus finished his workout, "but it must be controlled, or it controls you." "What if someone deserves it?" Marcus asked, unwrapping his hands. Master Liu studied him carefully. "There is a difference between defending yourself and seeking revenge. Make sure you know which one you're choosing." The next few days passed in a tense calm. Tyler and his crew seemed satisfied with their cafeteria victory, content to stick to smaller humiliations, shoulder checks in the hallway, cruel comments. In passing, the occasional thrown object when teachers weren't looking. Marcus endured it all with the same quiet stoicism, but inside he was changing. His movements became more precise, more controlled. His posture straightened slightly. He still kept his head down, but there was something different in his eyes, something that David noticed during their lunch meeting in the library. "You look, I don't know, different," David said, closing his math textbook. "Like you're planning something." "I'm not planning anything," Marcus replied, but his voice carried a new edge. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in November. Marcus was walking to his locker after his last class, looking forward to the weekend and 2 days away from Riverside High. The hallways were mostly empty. Most students had already headed home or to after-school activities. That's when he heard her. "Please, just leave me alone," a girl's voice said, shaky with fear. Marcus recognized the voice. Emma Rodriguez, a freshman who was even smaller and quieter than he was. She was smart. kept to herself, and had never bothered anyone. She was also Tyler's newest target. Marcus rounded the corner to see Emma backed against a wall of lockers, tears streaming down her face. Tyler stood in front of her, one hand pressed against the locker next to her head, his body blocking her escape. Jake and Austin flanked him, grinning like predators. "Come on, Emma," Tyler was saying, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Just one little kiss." "What's the big deal?" "I don't want to," Emma whispered, trying to shrink away from him. "What you want doesn't really matter," Tyler replied, leaning closer. "See, that's the thing about being nobody. Nobody cares what you think." That's when Marcus stepped into view. "Get away from her." The words came out quiet but clear, cutting through the hallway like a blade. Tyler turned, surprised to see Marcus standing there, backpack dropped at his feet. "Well, well," Tyler grinned, stepping away from Emma, but not by much. "Look who grew a backbone. What are you going to do about it, Twig?" Marcus looked at Emma, who was still pressed against the lockers, trembling. She reminded him of his younger sister back in LA, and something cold and furious settled in his chest. "I said get away from her," Marcus repeated, his voice still quiet, but carrying a new weight. Tyler laughed, and Jake cracked his knuckles. "You picked the wrong day to grow a pair, freak." "Emma," Marcus said without taking his eyes off Tyler, "go home." Emma didn't need to be told twice. She slipped past the group and ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing off the walls. Now, it was just Marcus and the three boys who had made his life hell for months. "Just you and us now," Tyler said, stepping closer. "No teachers, no other students, just us having a little conversation about respect." "Yeah," Jake added, rolling his shoulders. "Time for you to learn your place." Marcus stood perfectly still, his breathing calm and controlled. 3 years of training had taught him to read opponents, to see their weaknesses, their tells. Tyler was all confidence and no technique, a brawler who relied on size and intimidation. Jake was stockier but slow, the kind of fighter who telegraphed every move. Austin was just along for the ride, probably wouldn't even throw a punch unless his friends were winning. This is it, Marcus thought. No more walking away, no more turning the other cheek. "You know what?" Tyler said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been saving something special for you." He pulled out a small plastic bottle and unscrewed the cap. Marcus's nose immediately identified the smell. Urine. Tyler had brought a bottle of piss to school just for him. "Open your mouth, Twig," Tyler commanded, holding the bottle up. "Time for your medicine." The hallway fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Marcus looked at Tyler, then at Jake and Austin, then back at Tyler. Something was happening to his vision. Everything was becoming sharper, more focused. His heart rate slowed and his muscles relaxed. Master Liu was right, he thought. There is a difference between defending yourself and seeking revenge, but sometimes they're the same thing. "No," Marcus said simply. Tyler's grin widened. "What did you say?" "I said no." Marcus's voice was still quiet, but it carried a finality that made Austin take an unconscious step backward. "Wrong answer," Tyler snarled, lunging forward with the bottle. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but to Marcus, it felt like slow motion. Tyler came in high and sloppy, trying to grab Marcus by the throat while bringing the bottle toward his face. Marcus stepped to the side, caught Tyler's wrist, and used his own momentum against him. A simple hip toss, one of the first techniques Master Liu had taught him, sent Tyler crashing into the lockers with a sound like thunder. Jake rushed in next, throwing a wild haymaker that Marcus ducked easily. An uppercut to Jake's solar plexus doubled him over, and a knee to his face sent him sprawling across the floor, blood streaming from his nose. Austin tried to run, but Marcus caught him by the shoulder, spun him around, and delivered a precise strike to a pressure point that dropped him to his knees, gasping for air. The entire fight, if it could even be called that, was over in moments. Tyler was groaning against the lockers, his bottle of urine forgotten and spilled across the floor. Jake was unconscious, his face a bloody mess. Austin was on his hands and knees, struggling to breathe. Marcus stood in the center of the hallway, not even breathing hard. His clothes weren't wrinkled. His glasses hadn't even been knocked askew. He looked down at Tyler, who was staring up at him with a mixture of shock and terror. "You want to know my secret?" Marcus asked quietly, kneeling down so he was at Tyler's eye level. "I've been training in mixed martial arts for 3 years. I could have done this any time. I chose not to." Tyler tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. "But you threatened." "Emma?" Marcus continued, his voice carrying a cold edge that Tyler had never heard before. "And that's where I draw the line." Marcus stood up and looked around at the destruction he'd caused with such casual efficiency. 3 boys who had terrorized him for months were now broken and helpless at his feet. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just a cold emptiness where his fear used to be. "If any of you ever touch Emma again," Marcus said, his quiet voice somehow more terrifying than any shout, "I'll put you in the hospital. If you ever touch me again, I'll do worse." He picked up his backpack and walked away, leaving the three bullies groaning in the hallway. News of the fight spread through Riverside High like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone knew that Marcus Valdez, quiet, invisible Marcus, had single-handedly destroyed Tyler Brennan and his crew. The story grew in the telling, becoming more dramatic with each retelling, but the core facts remained the same. Tyler, Jake, and Austin spent the weekend in the emergency room. Tyler had a concussion and 3 cracked ribs. Jake's nose was broken in 2 places, and he'd lost 2 teeth. Austin had bruised ribs and couldn't speak above a whisper for a week. When Marcus walked into school on Monday, the hallways fell silent. Students parted like the Red Sea, some staring in awe, others in fear. He'd become a legend overnight, but not in a way he'd ever wanted. "Dude," David whispered when Marcus sat down in chemistry class, "is it true? Did you really beat up Tyler Brennan?" Marcus just shrugged and opened his textbook. He didn't want to talk about it. The fight had been necessary, but it hadn't solved anything. It had just changed the nature of his problems. The administration, of course, wanted answers. Principal Hayes called Marcus into his office first thing Monday morning, his face grave, with concern and legal liability. "Mr. Valdez," Principal Hayes said, studying the incident report, "we have 3 students in the hospital and several witnesses who say you were responsible. What exactly happened on Friday?" Marcus had prepared for this. "They were threatening a freshman girl. I intervened. They attacked me. I defended myself. 3. Against 1 and you came out without a scratch?" Marcus met the principal's eyes steadily. "I've had some training." Principal Hayes leaned back in his chair. The truth was, Tyler Brennan had been a problem for years, but his father's donations to the athletic program had made him untouchable, now that protection was gone, and Hayes found himself almost relieved. "The official story," Hayes said carefully, "is that this was a mutual altercation that got out of hand. All parties involved will serve 3 days of suspension. However, given that you were defending another student and were significantly outnumbered, your suspension will be in school only." Marcus nodded. He'd expected worse. When he returned to classes on Tuesday, the dynamic at Riverside High had completely shifted. Tyler and his crew were nowhere to be seen. They were all still recovering, but their absence had created a vacuum that Marcus found himself reluctantly filling. Students who had never spoken to him before now approached him in the hallways. Some wanted to be friends with the guy who had taken down the school's biggest bully. Others wanted to challenge him, to test his reputation. Most just wanted to know how he'd done it. "You're like a celebrity now," Emma Rodriguez said, approaching him at his locker after school on Wednesday. "Everyone's talking about you." Marcus looked down at the freshman girl he'd defended. She seemed less fragile now, more confident. That at least felt like a victory. "Are you okay?" he asked. Emma nodded. "Tyler hasn't even looked at me since, none of them have, thank you." Marcus closed his locker and shouldered his backpack. "You don't need to thank me. Just be careful, okay? Not everyone who picks on people is going to back down after one fight." As he walked toward the exit, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. The fear was gone, that constant anxiety that had followed him through the hallways for months, but it had been replaced by something else, something he wasn't sure he liked. People were afraid of him now. Not everyone, but enough. They moved out of his way, spoke to him differently, treated him with a respect born of fear rather than friendship. He'd wanted to be left alone, and now he was, but for entirely different reasons. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later. Tyler had returned to school the previous Monday, his ribs still tender and his pride completely shattered. He'd tried to maintain his social status, but the magic was gone. Students who had once hung on his every word now avoided him. His girlfriend had broken up with him. Even the teachers treated him differently. Marcus was leaving the library after, staying late to work on a history project, when Tyler appeared at the end of the hallway. He was alone, which was unusual. For the past week, he'd been traveling with a group of younger students who still looked up to him. "We need to talk," Tyler said, his voice hoarse and uncertain. Marcus stopped walking, but maintained his distance. "About what?" Tyler struggled for words, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. You ruined everything." "I defended myself," Marcus replied calmly, "and I defended Emma. Everything was fine before you showed up." Tyler's voice cracked with emotion. "I was somebody here. I had respect." Marcus studied Tyler's face and saw something he hadn't expected: tears. The former king of Riverside High was crying, his carefully constructed image completely destroyed. "You had fear," Marcus corrected quietly. "That's not the same thing. Has respect." Tyler wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by his own weakness. I don't know how to be nobody." For a moment, Marcus felt something unexpected. Pity. Tyler Brennan, for all his cruelty and arrogance, was just a scared kid who had used his size and social status to hide his own insecurities. Without those tools, he was lost. "You don't have to be nobody," Marcus said finally. "You just have to stop making other people feel like they are." Tyler looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Apologize to Emma. Apologize to everyone you hurt. Find a way to be somebody that doesn't require making other people feel small." Tyler stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'm sorry for what I did to you, all of it." Marcus nodded. "I know." As Tyler walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Marcus felt the last piece of his anger finally let go. The fight in the hallway had been about justice, about protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. But this conversation had been about something more, redemption maybe, or just the possibility that people could change. Marcus graduated from Riverside High 2 years later, near the top of his class. Tyler had kept his word. He'd apologized to Emma and to several other students he'd tormented over the years. He'd also joined the wrestling team, channeling his aggression into something constructive. On graduation day, as Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he caught sight of Emma in the audience. She'd grown into a confident young woman, no longer the frightened freshman he'd defended years earlier. She gave him a small wave and a smile that said everything that needed to be said. Master Liu had been right about anger being a tool. Marcus had learned to use it precisely, surgically, only when necessary and only for the right reasons. He'd also learned that sometimes the most important victory wasn't in the fight itself, but in what came after. The chance for everyone involved to become something better than they were before. The quiet kid who'd once walked the halls of Riverside High in fear was gone, replaced by a young man who understood the difference between strength and violence, between respect and fear. He'd learned that the most powerful way to deal with bullies wasn't necessarily to fight them, but when fighting became necessary, to do it decisively, completely, and then to offer a path towards something better. As he left Riverside High, for the final time, diploma in hand, Marcus smiled slightly. He'd survived the bullies, protected those who needed protecting, and somehow managed to help his tormentors find a better way forward. It hadn't been the story he'd expected when he first walked through those doors, but it was the story he'd chosen to write. Sometimes the quiet kid really was the most dangerous person in the room, but more importantly, sometimes he was also the most compassionate.